In an era defined by relentless noise, digital fragmentation, and a pervasive sense of anxiety, the quest for a stable internal foundation has never been more urgent. We live in a world that constantly demands our attention, pulling us toward external markers of success, social validation, and the frantic pursuit of things we cannot truly control. Yet, amidst this modern chaos, an ancient school of thought offers a remarkably contemporary solution. Stoicism is not a dry, academic exercise or a call to suppress human emotion. Rather, it is a sophisticated, battle-tested operating system for the human mind. It is a philosophy designed for the marketplace, the battlefield, and the halls of power, providing a practical framework for navigating the complexities of life with clarity and purpose. In the pages that follow, we will embark on a journey through the core tenets of Stoic wisdom, exploring how the insights of Roman emperors, former slaves, and playwrights can be applied to our 21st century lives. You will learn how to distinguish between what is within your power and what is not, how to transform obstacles into fuel for growth, and how to cultivate a character that remains unshakable regardless of external circumstances. This book is not merely about understanding Stoicism intellectually. It is about the active application of these principles to improve your daily existence. We will delve into the art of self-examination, the mastery of focus, and the development of resilience, showing you how to build an inner citadel that protects your peace of mind. By the end of this exploration, you will have a toolkit for living a life of virtue, meaning, and effectiveness. You will discover that the path to a better life does not lie in changing the world around you, but in refining the mind through which you perceive it. Whether you are seeking to overcome professional setbacks, improve your relationships, or simply find a sense of calm in a turbulent world, the lessons of the Stoics provide a timeless roadmap. Prepare to challenge your preconceived notions and engage in the most important work a human can undertake, the intentional shaping of one's own soul. This book serves as a comprehensive guide to the practical application of Stoic philosophy in modern life. At its heart, Stoicism is built upon the premise that while we cannot control the events that befall us, we have total sovereignty over our judgments and reactions. This orientation provides a high-level overview of the major themes we will explore, setting the stage for a deeper dive into specific practices. The narrative is structured around several core pillars. First, we emphasize the dichotomy of control, the fundamental Stoic realization that our energy should be reserved exclusively for our own thoughts and actions. Second, we explore the concept of virtue as the highest good, where courage, wisdom, justice, and moderation become the metrics of a successful life. Third, we examine the Stoic approach to resilience and obstacles, learning to view challenges not as bad luck, but as essential opportunities for training and growth. Throughout the chapters, you will meet the primary architects of this philosophy: Marcus Aurelius, the powerful Roman emperor who wrote to himself to stay humble; Epictetus, the former slave who taught that freedom is an internal state; and Seneca, the statesman and dramatist who navigated the treacherous waters of Nero's court. We will also look at modern figures who have embodied these principles under extreme pressure. Expect a journey that is both intellectually stimulating and deeply practical, designed to move you from passive observation to active, virtuous participation in your own life. For the Stoics, the journey toward a meaningful and tranquil life does not begin with the acquisition of wealth or the pursuit of status. It begins with the rigorous and honest examination of one's own mind. This is the starting point of all true philosophy. It is the moment when an individual stops drifting through life on autopilot and begins to scrutinize the internal machinery that drives their emotions, beliefs, and behaviors. This process of self-reflection is the essential first step in reclaiming your agency and ensuring that your life is guided by reason rather than impulse. Epictetus, one of the most influential Stoic teachers of the 2nd century CE, famously taught that the hallmark of a philosopher is the willingness to examine one's preconceived notions. We all walk through the world with a set of prolepsis, basic concepts or assumptions, about what is good, what is bad, what is fair, and what is necessary. Often, these notions are inherited from our parents, absorbed from our culture, or formed in the heat of emotional childhood experiences. We rarely stop to ask if these beliefs are actually true or if the words we use to describe our reality are accurate. When we begin to ask these questions, we are no longer just living, we are investigating the very nature of our existence. However, embarking on a quest for self-knowledge is fraught with difficulty. Two primary enemies stand in your way: ego and self-deception. The ego is a master of preservation. It wants to protect the image you have of yourself, even if that image is flawed. It will whisper that you already know who you are, that you have no major faults, and that your problems are always the fault of someone else. Self-deception acts as a shield, preventing you from seeing the gap between who you claim to be and how you actually act. Epictetus warned his students with a stinging truth. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. To truly grow, you must first admit your ignorance. You must approach your own mind with the humility of a student who realizes they have much to learn. This openness is the only way to bypass the ego's defenses. As you peel back the layers of your psyche, the view might be uncomfortable. You will likely encounter aspects of your character that are difficult to acknowledge: deep-seated weaknesses, petty habits, unearned pride, and a desperate need for the approval of others. The natural impulse is to look away, to rationalize these traits, or to bury them under distractions. The Stoics advise the exact opposite: push through the discomfort, keep looking. Taking stock of your less lovely qualities is not an exercise in self-flagellation. It is a necessary diagnostic tool. If you refuse to look honestly at a wound, you can never heal it. Similarly, if you don't recognize your tendency toward anger or your habit of procrastination, you will never be able to apply the necessary philosophical medicine to change those patterns. Beyond the internal landscape, the Stoics also emphasize the critical importance of being aware of your social environment. We are social animals, and our character is remarkably porous. The people with whom we choose to spend our time act as a silent but powerful influence on our development. If you surround yourself with individuals who are cynical, lazy, or obsessed with superficialities, those traits will eventually begin to feel normal to you. Conversely, if you keep company with those who strive for excellence, who are courageous in the face of hardship, and who act with integrity, you will find yourself naturally elevated by their example. Seneca, a Roman statesman and philosopher who lived a generation before Epictetus, offered a practical technique for maintaining this moral clarity. He suggested that we should each select a person of high character, someone we deeply respect and admire, and keep them in our mind as a constant witness. Whether this person is a historical figure, a mentor, or a virtuous friend, the mere thought that they are observing and sympathetically judging our behavior can serve as a powerful deterrent to our baser impulses. When faced with a temptation to act selfishly or dishonestly, we can ask ourselves, what would my mentor think of this action? This mental exercise provides an external perspective that helps us see our choices in a clearer, more objective light. The ultimate goal of this dual focus, looking inward at ourselves and outward at our influences, is to achieve a state of clarity. When you know your own triggers and you understand the influences acting upon you, you are no longer a puppet of your circumstances. This clarity is the prerequisite for virtuous action. It allows you to pause in the heat of a moment and choose a path that is courageous rather than cowardly, wise rather than foolish, moderate rather than excessive, and just rather than selfish. Philosophy, in the Stoic sense, is the lifelong practice of refining this clarity so that every action we take is a reflection of our best selves. In the modern world, it has become a common refrain that we are living through a crisis of attention. Between the relentless 24-hour news cycle, the seductive pull of social media, and the constant notifications from our devices, our minds are being tugged in 1,000 different directions at once. We feel fragmented, overwhelmed, and perpetually busy, yet strangely unproductive. While the technology of distraction has certainly evolved, the Stoics would argue that the fundamental challenge is as old as humanity itself. Even in ancient Rome, people struggled with the clutter of the mind and the temptation to focus on the trivial rather than the essential. Marcus Aurelius, who sat atop the Roman Empire at the height of its power, was perhaps the most focused man of his age. He faced constant wars, a devastating plague, and the administrative burdens of an empire, yet he managed to maintain a disciplined inner life. His primary method for eliminating distraction was a powerful mental exercise. He advised approaching every single task as if it were your last. Imagine that whatever you are doing right now, whether it's writing a report, having a conversation with a loved one, or even washing the dishes, is the final act of your life. If you knew you were going to die in the next hour, how would you perform that task? This is not meant to be a morbid or depressing thought. On the contrary, it is a bracing call to presence. When you take this mental exercise seriously, the noise of the world begins to fall away. You stop worrying about what people think of you, you stop ruminating on past mistakes, and you stop anxious planning for the distant future. There is only the present moment and the duty at hand. By treating your current action as your legacy, you naturally increase the quality of your work and the depth of your engagement. If this is the last thing the world will know of you, you will naturally want to make it count. Another foundational technique for maintaining focus involves the dichotomy of control. For the Stoics, the vast majority of our stress and distraction comes from trying to control things that are simply not up to us. They argued that there is ultimately only one thing within our absolute control, our own mind and the judgments we make. You might argue that you control your body, but the Stoics would point out that your body can be struck by illness, injured in an accident, or succumb to the aging process regardless of your will. You can influence your health, but you cannot guarantee it. You can influence your reputation, but you cannot control what others think. By accepting this reality, you can achieve a twofold benefit. First, it sharpens your focus. Instead of scattering your energy across 100 variables you can't control, you funnel all your power into the one thing you can, your own thoughts and choices. Second, it lifts a massive burden of responsibility from your shoulders. You no longer have to feel guilty about the weather, the economy, or the behavior of a difficult colleague. Your only job is to ensure that your mind is functioning rationally and that your actions are aligned with your values. As Epictetus taught, once you realize that external matters can be left to fortune, you gain a level of mental tranquility that the distracted world can never touch. To make these high-level concepts practical, you can integrate them into a structured daily routine. The Stoics were big believers in bookending the day with reflection. In the morning, before the world begins its assault on your attention, take a moment of quiet. Remind yourself of the distinction between what you can and cannot control. Explicitly tell yourself, "Today I will encounter difficult people, unexpected delays, and physical discomfort. None of these are in my control, but my reaction to them is." This prepares the mind for the day's battles. At midday, when the pressure of work and social interaction is at its peak, pause for a reset. Remind yourself that your only true power is the capacity to make choices. If things are going poorly, remember that you still have the choice to remain calm and professional. If things are going well, remember that you have the choice to remain humble. Finally, before you go to sleep, conduct a mental audit. Review the events of the day and consider how much of what happened was outside of your control. Did you waste energy worrying about a rumor? Did you get angry at a traffic jam? By recognizing these as external matters belonging to fortune, you can let them go. You can sleep with a clear conscience, knowing that you did your best with the things that were yours to manage and left the rest to the universe. This routine isn't just about productivity. It's about protecting the sanctity of your attention and ensuring that your life is lived with intention. One of the most profound insights from the Stoic tradition is the idea that our distress does not come from the events themselves, but from the way we choose to perceive them. Epictetus, in his manual for living known as the Asterisk Enchiridion, introduced a powerful metaphor to illustrate this: the concept of the two handles. He taught that every situation, every conflict, and every setback in life has two metaphorical handles. One handle is sturdy and allows you to carry the situation effectively, while the other is weak or broken, making the burden impossible to lift without causing yourself pain. To understand this, let's look at the example Epictetus himself provided. Imagine you have a brother who has treated you unfairly or committed some wrong against you. In this situation, there are two handles you could reach for. The first handle is the wrongdoing itself. You could focus entirely on the injustice, the anger you feel, and the way your brother has failed you. If you grab this handle, you will find the situation heavy and bitter. You will be consumed by resentment, and the relationship will likely fracture further. You are trying to carry the situation using a handle that is not designed to support the weight of a healthy life. The second handle, however, is the fact that this person is your brother. You were raised in the same home, you share a history, and at the core, there is a bond of kinship and love. This is the handle that allows you to carry the situation. By choosing to focus on the relationship and your own duty to be a virtuous sibling, you can approach the conflict with patience and a desire for reconciliation. You haven't changed the fact that he did something wrong, but you have changed your grip on the reality of it. By using the right handle, you maintain your own character and peace of mind. This isn't just ancient theory. It has been used to save lives in the modern era. Consider the story of William Seabrook, a well-known journalist in the early 20th century. In 1933, Seabrook found himself spiraling into severe alcoholism. Desperate for a cure at a time when modern rehabilitation didn't exist, he took the radical step of committing himself to an insane asylum, as they were then called. For the first several weeks of his stay, Seabrook grabbed the wrong handle. He viewed himself as a victim of a cruel system. He rebelled against the doctors, resisted the daily routines, and became a pariah among the staff and other patients. He was on the verge of being expelled, which likely would have meant his death through continued addiction. In a moment of clarity, the Stoic metaphor of the two handles flashed through his mind. He realized that up until that point, he had been holding the handle of resistance and addiction. He was viewing the asylum as a prison. He decided to reach for the other handle, the handle of recovery and opportunity. He began to view the asylum not as a place of punishment, but as a laboratory for his own transformation. He embraced the rules, began to participate fully in the process, and even started to find joy in the simplicity of a sober life. By simply changing his mental grip, he transformed a hellish experience into a life-saving one. The beauty of the two handles technique is its universal applicability. You can use it in small daily frustrations and in major life crises. If you lose your job, you can grab the handle of failure and shame, or you can grab the handle of new beginnings and the opportunity to pivot. If a friend cancels plans at the last minute, you can grab the handle of disrespect, or the handle of unexpected free time for reading or rest. It is important to remember that this is not about positive thinking in a naive sense. It is about a realistic assessment of utility. The Stoics were pragmatists. They asked, which way of looking at this actually helps me move forward as a virtuous person? If the way you are currently approaching a problem is leaving you paralyzed, angry, or miserable, it is a clear sign that you are using the wrong handle. There is always another way to frame the situation, a handle that allows you to lift the weight without breaking your spirit. While Seabrook's story is a dramatic example of life-changing results, the same principle can provide you with a more resilient and effective way to navigate every challenge you face. A central tenet of Stoic wisdom is the recognition that we are often our own worst enemies when it comes to clear thinking. Most of us believe we are rational, objective observers of the world, but the reality is that our minds are cluttered with biases, half-truths, and involuntary interpretations. To the Stoic, improving one's intelligence is not about memorizing more facts. It is about developing the humility to identify the flaws in our own cognitive processes. We must become detectives of our own thoughts, constantly testing them for the rot of prejudice and assumption. One of the most common flaws in human thinking is our reliance on mental shortcuts or biases. Our brains have evolved to make split-second decisions based on past experiences, a trait that was essential for survival in the wild. For example, if you hear a low growl in the bushes, your brain doesn't wait for a formal analysis. It triggers an immediate flight response. As Malcolm Gladwell discusses in his book Blink**, this capacity for rapid cognition is incredibly powerful. However, it has a significant shadow side. It is just as easy for us to blink our way into reinforcing deep-seated prejudices. Imagine you are at a social gathering and you meet a stranger who happens to have the same facial expressions or tone of voice as someone who bullied you in grade school. Before that person has even finished their first sentence, your brain has likely categorized them as untrustworthy or annoying. You find yourself being cold or dismissive for no objective reason. This is a failure of Stoic clarity. To combat this, we must practice the pause. Before acting on an impulse or a judgment, we should ask ourselves, what assumptions am I bringing to this interaction? Is it possible I am misreading this person based on a ghost from my past? This small act of self-assessment is often the difference between a wise decision and an embarrassing mistake. Marcus Aurelius frequently wrote about the need to look for cause and effect in our own behavior. He encouraged a systematic review of our thoughts to see which specific prejudices lead to which specific actions. If you notice that you always get defensive when a certain topic is raised, you must trace that reaction back to its source. Are you defending a truth, or are you defending a fragile ego? By mapping the geography of your biases, you gain the power to navigate around them rather than being driven by them. Another layer of this mental purification involves distinguishing between observation and perception. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary 17th-century Japanese swordsman and philosopher, although not a formal Stoic, shared this profound insight. He argued that there are two ways to see, with the observing eye and the perceiving eye. The difference is subtle but vital. The observing eye sees things exactly as they are, without any added story. It sees a red car, it sees a person walking quickly, it sees a rainy day. The perceiving eye, however, immediately adds interpretation and meaning. It sees a flashy red car judgment, a rude person who is ignoring me projection, or a gloomy, miserable, rainy day emotional coloring. The perceiving eye is where most of our suffering begins. When we allow the perceiving eye to take the lead, we create problems where none exist. We interpret a boss's brief email as a sign that we are about to be fired, or a partner's silence as a sign of fading love. Stoicism teaches us to strip away these interpretations and return to the bare facts of the situation. When you find yourself getting upset, stop and ask, what is the observing eye seeing right now? The answer might be, my boss sent a 5-word email. Everything else, the fear, the anxiety, the story of being fired, is the work of the perceiving eye. By consciously choosing to rely on the observing eye, we bring a cool, clinical clarity to our lives. We stop reacting to the movies playing in our heads and start responding to the reality in front of us. This clarity is the foundation of Stoic wisdom and the key to an unshakable mind. The modern world presents us with an unprecedented paradox of choice. We are bombarded with options for everything from the trivial, which of the 1,000 streaming shows should we watch tonight, to the monumental, which career path will lead to the most fulfillment. While having options is a form of freedom, it often leads to a state of decision paralysis. We become so afraid of making the wrong choice that we end up making no choice at all, drifting through life instead of steering it. Stoicism offers a powerful antidote to this stagnation, teaching us to live life action by action, focused on the present moment and the person we are striving to become. To overcome the paralysis of choice, the Stoics suggest a simple but profound thought experiment. Start by vividly imagining the ideal version of yourself. This is not a version of you who is famous or wealthy, but a version of you who embodies the highest virtues, someone who is consistently courageous, wise, disciplined, and fair. Once you have this image in your mind, use it as a compass for every decision you face. When confronted with a choice, ask yourself, what would my best self do in this situation? By shifting the focus from "what do I want right now" to "who am I trying to become," the path forward often becomes remarkably clear. However, having a compass is only useful if you actually start walking. Procrastination is one of the most common ways we resist the call to live virtuously. We tell ourselves we will start that project, have that difficult conversation, or begin that new habit when the time is right, or when I feel more inspired. Marcus Aurelius had no patience for this kind of delay. He wrote that if you truly want to change something about your life, the best and only day for action is today. The perfect time is a myth created by the ego to keep us safe and comfortable in our current state. Think of yourself as an archer aiming at a target. This is a classic Stoic metaphor for the human life. To be a successful archer, you must do several things. You must choose a worthy target, you must string your bow with care, and you must take careful aim. But all of that preparation is meaningless unless you actually let go of the arrow. You can stand on the range for hours preparing to shoot, but until the arrow is in flight, you haven't actually engaged in archery. In life, we often spend too much time aiming and not enough time releasing. Procrastination is a form of internal resistance that keeps the arrow on the string. To break this resistance, you must simply commit to the act of releasing, regardless of whether you feel perfectly ready. Once the arrow has left the bow, however, a crucial Stoic shift occurs. You must learn to enjoy the process rather than fixating on the result. An archer can do everything right. They can have perfect form and a clear eye. But once the arrow is in the air, a sudden gust of wind can knock it off course. If the archer's happiness depends entirely on hitting the bullseye, they are at the mercy of the wind. But if their satisfaction comes from the excellence of their technique and the fact that they took the shot, they remain in control of their own well-being. This is how we should approach our goals. We should definitely set them. Aiming to be our best self is the highest goal there is, but we must not let our peace of mind be tied to achieving perfection. Epictetus was fond of reminding his students that the perfect Stoic is an ideal, not a reality. To be perfectly virtuous in every single moment is impossible for a human being. We will stumble, we will get angry, and we will make selfish choices. But the ideal still matters because it gives us a direction. Life is not defined by a single, earth-shattering epiphany that suddenly makes us perfect. It is built one small decision at a time. It is about the savoring of the work. If you can learn to find fulfillment in the daily effort of trying to be a little better than you were yesterday, you have already won. You are no longer waiting for a distant future to be happy. You are finding meaning in the very act of living. By focusing on the action-by-action nature of life, you replace the paralysis of choice with the momentum of purpose. Most people approach life with a straight-line mentality. They set a goal, create a plan, and expect to move from point A to point B with minimal interference. When an obstacle inevitably appears, a financial setback, a health issue, or a betrayal, they view it as a disaster, a sign that their plan has failed and that their progress has been halted. The Stoics, however, viewed the world very differently. They recognized that the world is inherently unpredictable and that interference is not an anomaly. It is a fundamental part of the journey. Instead of obsessively trying to plan away every possible complication, a task that is both impossible and exhausting, the Stoics focused on developing internal qualities, creativity, independence, and inventiveness. They didn't want a plan that was fragile. They wanted a mind that was resilient. This resilience allows a person to remain flexible and effective regardless of how the external circumstances change. They didn't just tolerate obstacles. They trained themselves to turn those obstacles to their advantage. One of the most practical tools for this is what modern Stoics call the reverse clause. This is essentially a built-in backup option for every action you take. It is the mental habit of adding the phrase, "fate permitting," to your intentions. When you say, "I am going to finish this project today, fate permitting," you are acknowledging the reality that external factors might intervene. If they do, you are not caught off guard. You have already mentally prepared for the possibility of a detour. More importantly, the reverse clause allows you to immediately pivot and find a new way to make progress. For example, imagine you have carved out a morning to do deep, focused work on your computer, but then a power outage occurs or your hard drive crashes, erasing your latest draft. A non-Stoic might spend the rest of the day in a state of fury and despair. A Stoic, however, uses the reverse clause. They see the obstacle as an opportunity to do something else that is also valuable. Perhaps it's an opportunity to start fresh on a new and improved version of the work, using the lessons learned from the first draft. Or, if the computer is totally gone, perhaps it's an opportunity to finally have that face-to-face conversation with a colleague, or to spend an hour in quiet reflection. If you are stuck in a massive traffic jam on the way to an important meeting, you can view it as a waste of time, or you can use the reverse clause to see it as an opportunity to finish that audiobook you've been meaning to listen to, or to practice the art of remaining calm under pressure. By having a backup for your attention, your progress is never truly halted. You are simply making progress in a different area. This concept is so central to Stoic success that author Ryan Holiday dedicated an entire book to it, titled The Obstacle is the Way*. The title is taken from a famous passage in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations*. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is a radical shift in perspective. It suggests that the very thing that seems to be blocking you is actually providing you with the exact material you need to grow. If you are facing a difficult person, they are not just an annoyance. They are the material you need to practice patience and justice. If you are facing a physical injury, it is the material you need to practice fortitude and the recognition that your mind is separate from your body. When you adopt this mindset, you become virtually unstoppable. There is no situation that can happen to you that doesn't contain an opportunity for virtuous action. By managing your expectations and embracing the reverse clause, you ensure that you are always moving forward, even when the path takes an unexpected turn. For the Stoics, the ultimate goal of human life is not happiness in the sense of fleeting pleasure or comfort, but eudaimonia*, often translated as flourishing or living well. The only way to achieve this state is through the pursuit of virtue. While many modern people view virtue as a quaint or restrictive concept, the Stoics saw it as the highest purpose and the most practical way to navigate a complex world. They defined virtue as a composite of 4 essential traits: courage, wisdom, moderation, and justice. To live virtuously is to aim for excellence in each of these areas, regardless of the cost. The primary benefit of committing to virtue is that it provides a razor that cuts through the confusion of life. Most of our modern anxieties stem from pursuing goals that are inherently unstable. Take, for example, the goal of making as much money as possible. The problem with this pursuit is twofold. First, it is an external goal. No matter how hard you work, a market crash or a dishonest partner can take it all away. Second, the pursuit of wealth often leads to a compromise of character. People who make money their be-all and end-all frequently find themselves committing atrocious deeds or neglecting their families in the name of self-enrichment. They may end up with a full bank account but a hollow soul. Virtue is fundamentally different. If your primary goal is to act courageously, wisely, moderately, and justly, you are in total control of your success. No one can stop you from being a just person. Furthermore, virtue provides a moral floor that you refuse to drop below. You may still make plenty of money. Stoicism is not a vow of poverty, but you will not earn it through deception or exploitation. The money becomes a preferred indifferent, something that is nice to have, but not essential to your character or your happiness. Seneca, the Roman statesman, emphasized that the pursuit of virtue must be entirely voluntary. He wrote in his moral letters that every noble deed is voluntary. You cannot be forced to be virtuous. It must be a conscious choice you make for yourself. This is what gives virtue its power. It is an internal commitment that remains steady even when there is no external reward or when no one is watching. We see a supreme example of this in the life of Marcus Aurelius. As the Emperor of Rome, he held absolute power over the known world. He had no boss, no HR department, and no one who could hold him accountable for his private thoughts or actions. He was under immense pressure from constant wars on the borders and political intrigue at home. It would have been incredibly easy for him to succumb to the temptations of power, to be cruel, to be indulgent, or to be selfish. Yet his private journals, which we now know as the * Meditations, reveal a man who was obsessively committed to good character, good intentions, and good actions. He held himself to a higher standard than anyone else could have, not because he had to, but because he believed it was his nature to do so. For Marcus and other Stoics, this commitment to virtue inevitably led to a commitment to helping others. They believed in the concept of cosmopolitanism, the idea that we are all citizens of the world and that we have a duty to the human hive. Marcus wrote that working with others is what you've been made by nature for. We are not isolated islands. We are part of a vast, interconnected system. When we act with justice and kindness toward others, we are not just doing them a favor. We are fulfilling our own purpose as rational, social beings. We each have a stake in making the world a better place, and the most direct way to do that is to ensure that our own actions are a source of good. By aspiring to virtuousness in everything we do, from how we treat a waiter to how we lead a company, we create a life that is not only effective but deeply meaningful. Virtue is the only thing that cannot be taken from us, and therefore, it is the only true foundation for a stable and flourishing life. There is a common misconception that philosophy is an ivory tower pursuit, a luxury for academics who spend their days debating abstract concepts that have no relevance to the real world. While some schools of thought may fit this description, Stoicism is the polar opposite. Stoicism is a philosophy of action, designed to produce tangible results in the midst of life's most difficult circumstances. It is not about retreating from the world to find peace. It is about finding peace so that you can engage with the world more effectively. The hallmark of a Stoic is pragmatism. They are focused on getting things done and are remarkably resistant to the excuses that often derail others. Consider the plight of the blocked artist. Many writers, painters, and musicians find themselves unable to work because they are waiting for inspiration, or because their current environment isn't perfect. They might move to a new city, buy a new desk, or wait for a specific mood to strike before they begin. The Stoic sees this as a form of self-deception. They understand that if your ability to do your work depends on external conditions, you have surrendered your agency. In reality, it makes no difference where you are or how you feel. The work is there to be done, and the only way to do it is to press on regardless of the circumstances. This principle applies to the practice of Stoicism itself. You don't need to go to a retreat, enter a monastery, or find a quiet mountain top to live a Stoic life. The laboratory for Stoicism is your current life, your stressful job, your noisy apartment, your complicated family dynamics. These are not obstacles to your practice, they are your practice. As the Stoics often said, where there is a human being, there is an opportunity for a kindness. Similarly, where there is a challenge, there is an opportunity for Stoic discipline. Another vital pragmatic truth recognized by the Stoics is that we must not let perfection become the enemy of the good. This all-or-nothing thinking is a major source of stagnation. We often tell ourselves that if we can't do something perfectly, there's no point in doing it at all. We might abandon a fitness plan because we missed one day, or give up on a project because the first draft was mediocre. The Stoic understands that human effort is inherently imperfect. We will fall short of our ideals, but it is far better to try, to fall short, and to learn from the experience than to remain paralyzed by the fear of imperfection. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. This pragmatic approach was echoed by the 20th century community organizer Saul Alinsky in his book Rules for Radicals. Alinsky argued that if you want to change the world, you must first accept the world exactly as it is. You cannot start from where you wish things were. You must start from the messy, flawed reality of the present. This acceptance doesn't mean you are passive or that you approve of the status quo. On the contrary, it makes your efforts for change far more effective. When you stop wasting energy fuming about how things should be, you can focus all your power on the practical steps needed to move things toward how they could be. Stoics are the ultimate realists. They don't indulge in wishful thinking or idealistic fantasies that ignore the constraints of reality. Instead, they look at the situation in front of them with a cold, clear eye and ask, "What is the most effective and virtuous action I can take right now?" By staying focused on results and refusing to get sidetracked by ego or unrealistic expectations, the Stoic becomes a person who consistently gets things done. They are the calm center in the middle of a storm, the person who can be relied upon when things go wrong, and the person who makes steady progress while others are still waiting for the perfect conditions to begin. At the core of Stoic resilience is one of the most powerful metaphors in the history of philosophy, the inner citadel. The Stoics believe that regardless of what happens to us externally, whether we face financial ruin, physical illness, or social exile, we each possess an internal fortress that is, by its very nature, impregnable. This citadel is the seat of our reason and our character. It is the one place where we are truly sovereign, and as long as we do not surrender it from within, no external force can conquer it. The Stoics often associated this citadel with the soul or the ruling faculty of the mind. Even if you don't subscribe to a religious view of the soul, the metaphor remains incredibly useful. It reminds us that there is a fundamental distinction between what happens asterisk to asterisk us and who we asterisk are asterisk. Your citadel cannot be damaged by rain, lightning, or a physical blow. However, it can be compromised by your own reactions. If you allow anger to cloud your judgment, if you allow fear to dictate your actions, or if you allow bitterness to poison your outlook, you are effectively opening the gates of your fortress to the enemy. The only thing that can truly harm your character is your own choice to abandon your principles. To build and maintain this inner citadel, the Stoics practiced a form of voluntary hardship. They believed that if you only ever experience comfort, you will become fragile and easily broken by the first sign of trouble. To prevent this, they would intentionally seek out difficult conditions to test their defenses. Consider the example of Cato the Younger, a Roman statesman known for his uncompromising integrity. Cato was a wealthy man who could afford the finest luxuries, yet he chose to live with extreme discipline. He would frequently walk around Rome barefoot and without a hat, regardless of whether it was scorching hot or freezing cold. He wanted to ensure that if he were ever deprived of his wealth or his shoes, he would remain completely unfazed. He was training his mind to be independent of his physical comfort. To a Stoic, misfortune is not a reason for self-pity. It is an opportunity to see what you are truly made of. Seneca, in his essay on Providence, went as far as to say that a person who has never experienced difficulty is actually unlucky. Why? Because they have never been tested. They have no way of knowing their true potential or the strength of their own character. Just as an athlete needs resistance to build muscle, a human being needs challenges to build virtue. When you view setbacks as training, you stop fearing them and start using them to reinforce your inner citadel. The power of this mindset is perhaps most vividly illustrated by the life of James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy pilot who was shot down over North Vietnam in 1965. As his plane plummeted toward the jungle, Stockdale didn't panic. He later recalled that he thought of the teachings of Epictetus, the former slave who taught that the mind can remain free even when the body is in chains. Stockdale knew he was entering a world of incredible hardship, but he also knew that his captors could never touch his inner citadel unless he let them. Stockdale spent the next 7.5 years as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton. He was brutally and repeatedly tortured, kept in solitary confinement, and denied basic medical care. Yet he became a leader of the resistance among the prisoners. He never allowed himself to indulge in unrealistic optimism, the false hope that he would be home by Christmas, which he saw as a form of mental weakness that led to despair. Instead, he practiced a grounded Stoic resilience. He accepted the brutal reality of his situation while never losing faith that he would ultimately prevail. At one point, his captors planned to use him in a propaganda video to show the world how, well, the prisoners were being treated. To prevent this, Stockdale deliberately disfigured his own face with a heavy stool and cut his scalp with a razor. He chose physical pain and further punishment over the betrayal of his principles. He proved that even in a cage, a man can remain sovereign. Stockdale's story is a testament to the fact that the inner citadel is not just a poetic idea. It is a life-saving reality for those who have the discipline to build it. By realizing that you alone have power over your own mind, you gain a level of resilience that can withstand any storm. In our typical approach to life, we tend to view hope as a positive emotion and fear as a negative one. We spend our lives hoping for certain outcomes, a promotion, a successful relationship, a sunny vacation, and fearing their opposites. The Stoics, however, were deeply skeptical of both. They recognized that hope and fear are two sides of the same coin. They both involve attaching our happiness to future events that are, by definition, outside of our control. When we hope, we are saying, I can only be happy if X happens. When we fear, we are saying, I will be miserable if Y happens. In both cases, we have surrendered our tranquility to fate. The Stoic alternative is a concept known as Amor Fati or a love of fate. This is a radical step beyond mere acceptance. It is not just throwing up your hands and saying, what will be will be. Instead, it is the active, enthusiastic embrace of whatever happens, even if it is not what you would have chosen. It is the realization that the present moment is the only reality we have, and to wish it were different is as futile as wishing the sun wouldn't rise. This is often called the art of acquiescence. Rather than pointlessly struggling to change the circumstances to fit our desires, we instead adapt our desires to the situation. We stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, how can I use this? This is a clever and highly effective strategy for living. When you love your fate, you take full responsibility for your life. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and start being the architect of your response to them. It is vital to understand that Amor Fati is not a call to passivity or resignation. It does not mean you stop trying to improve things. It means you accept the starting point of the present moment so that you can act more effectively. Consider the example of Franklin D. Roosevelt. He was a man of immense ambition who had worked his entire life toward the goal of becoming President of the United States. Then, at the age of 39, he was suddenly struck by polio, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. FDR could have spent the rest of his life in a state of bitter resentment, mourning the lost version of himself. Instead, he practiced a version of Amor Fati. He recognized that while he couldn't change the fact of his disease, he could entirely control his reaction to it. He calmly accepted his physical condition and refused to see himself as a victim. This acceptance didn't stop his ambition, it fueled it. He went on to be elected to the presidency 4 times, leading the country through the Great Depression and World War II. His physical limitation became a source of the legendary empathy and resilience that defined his leadership. Another powerful example is found in the life of Malcolm X as a young man. He was incarcerated for burglary. He could have spent his years in prison fuming against the system or descending into the criminal culture of the cell block. Instead, he embraced his fate. He viewed his incarceration not as a dead end, but as a forced retreat. He used the time to educate himself, reading every book in the prison library and eventually undergoing a profound religious and intellectual transformation. By the time he was released, he was a highly motivated, articulate, and enlightened leader. His time in prison, which most would see as a disaster, became the foundation of his greatest contributions to the civil rights movement. Think of the incredible amount of energy we waste every day wishing for the impossible, wishing the weather were better, wishing our boss were different, wishing we hadn't made that mistake 5 years ago. This energy is a total loss. By practicing Amor Fati you reclaim all of that wasted power and invest it back into the actual situation as it stands before you. When you love your fate, you become a partner with the universe rather than its opponent. Success becomes entirely achievable because you are no longer fighting against reality. You are working with it to create something virtuous and meaningful. The most uncomfortable truth of human existence is its inherent transience. We live in a culture that goes to great lengths to hide the reality of death, treating it as a failure of medicine or a distant tragedy that we shouldn't think about. The Stoics, however, took the opposite approach. They believed that the contemplation of death, memento mori is the most powerful tool we have for living a vibrant, meaningful, and focused life. To the Stoic, death is not a source of fear. It is the ultimate motivator. If we look at history, we see that everything is subject to the law of decay. The Roman Empire, which once seemed eternal and invincible, eventually fell. The longest human life ever recorded is just a little over 122 years, a mere blink in the eyes of the universe. To ignore this reality is to live in a state of delusion. By accepting that our time is limited, we are forced to ask the most important question: how should I spend the time I have left? Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to live every day as if it were his last. This was not an invitation to hedonism, to eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we die. For a Stoic, that would be a waste of a rational mind. Instead, it was a call to live bravely and without apathy. He meant that we should approach every deed, every conversation, and every choice as if it were our final act on earth. If you had to look back on today from your deathbed, would you be content with how you treated people? Would you be proud of the work you did? This perspective strips away the trivial and forces us to focus on what truly matters, our character and our contributions. While the thought of death is naturally frightening because of the unknown, the Stoics offered a logical comfort. They argued that if death is truly the end of consciousness, then there is nothing to fear. You will not be there to experience being dead. Death brings an end to all worry, all physical pain, and even the fear of death itself. It is a return to the state you were in before you were born. If you didn't suffer for the billions of years before your birth, you won't suffer for the billions of years after your death. Seneca provided a dramatic example of this acceptance during his final moments. When the Emperor Nero ordered Seneca to commit suicide, his friends and family were overcome with grief, begging the guards for mercy. Seneca, however, remained perfectly calm. He actually scolded his loved ones, asking them where their years of philosophical training had gone. He had spent his life preparing for this moment, and he was ready to accept it with dignity and courage. He understood that his life was a loan from nature, and nature was now calling in that loan. Cicero, another great Roman thinker influenced by Stoic ideas, argued that to philosophize is to learn how to die. This means that the entire purpose of philosophy is to prepare us for the inevitable end so that we don't waste our lives in a state of fearful avoidance. When we stop fearing death, we are finally free to live. We stop putting off our happiness and our virtue for a future that may never come. We start living with a sense of urgency and gratitude for the present moment. Ultimately, Stoicism is a practical tool for shaping a life that you can be happy with when it finally reaches its conclusion. It's not about having all the answers to life's big metaphysical questions. It's about having a set of principles that you use every single day to make better choices. By embracing the power of death, you gain a perspective that makes most of our modern problems seem insignificant. You realize that the only thing that truly belongs to you is the quality of your own mind and the integrity of your actions. In the end, a life well lived is its own reward, and death is simply the final stroke on the canvas of a masterpiece. As we conclude this journey through the landscape of Stoic wisdom, it is important to reiterate that Stoicism is, above all, a practical philosophy. It was never intended to be an abstract framework for intellectual rumination or a way to sound smart at dinner parties. Instead, it provides a rigorous, battle-tested set of guiding principles designed to help you make better choices in the heat of real-world challenges. By applying these lessons, you are not just adopting a new set of beliefs, you are undergoing a fundamental shift in how you relate to yourself and the world around you. The key takeaway of this entire exploration is the realization that your internal state is your own responsibility. Through the dichotomy of control, the inner citadel, and the practice of Amor Fati, you have been given the tools to reclaim your agency. You no longer need to be a victim of your emotions, your past, or your circumstances. You have the power to examine your mind, to focus your attention, and to transform every obstacle into a stepping stone for growth. This is the path to true freedom, a freedom that cannot be taken away by any external force. As a final piece of actionable advice, I encourage you to stop looking for happiness in external things. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the comforts of life, fine clothes, good food, or professional success. But the moment you let your happiness asterisk depend on these things, you have become a slave. The more we rely on external rewards and the validation of others, the more fragile we become. The next time you find yourself scrolling through social media looking for likes, or trying to fix a bad mood with a mindless purchase, pause and ask yourself, what meaningful, virtuous action could I be taking instead? The hit of dopamine from a fancy purchase or a digital notification is fleeting and ultimately hollow, but the satisfaction that comes from acting with courage, wisdom, and integrity lasts a lifetime. Stoicism is not about being emotionless. It is about being emotionally resilient. It is about building a life of such depth and character that you can face the world with a smile, knowing that you have done your best with the things that were yours to manage. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single, intentional step. Take that step today. For more book summaries for free, install Zyroverse.